Welcome to the Generational Growth Podcast, where we teach people to grow and give with abundance. We are at a point in time right now in history to where people need to start taking care of people. The cat's out of the bag. Corporations and governments are not going to save us. So that is the intent of this podcast, to give people trusted connections and trusted sources so they could get to their why quicker. Financial education is not taught. I was a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Financial education is still not even taught there. So that is another big aspect of what I'm doing here, is to teach people financial education, to put some of that information out there so you can learn and get to your why quicker. And this all ties directly into my estate planning and my greater why, which is to support jiu-jitsu communities and the disabled community as well too. Everyone wants to help other people, but sometimes we're not sure exactly how we could do that. So you could look at my system, what I'm building here, and you could apply it to your passion. It could be your family, it could be dancing, it could be jiu-jitsu. Really irrelevant, but I could teach you a system to help you get to your why quicker. So with this episode, we are going to be talking with Jay. He is a business broker, and business brokers are in the business of selling businesses. So they look at a business, they do an evaluation, and they may make some adjustments to that business so they could sell in a more efficient manner and make sure that that business is taken care of. So this episode was great. We're going to talk with Jay here in a bit, and welcome to the episode. Good morning, everyone. This is my friend Jay. We met on LinkedIn. He is a business broker, and I help a lot of small businesses with what I do. Also help a lot of employees help get off of their W-2 income and into small businesses. So I found Jay on LinkedIn, saw that we have lots of overlaps, and wanted to learn more about what a business broker does and the value that they could bring to small business owners. So Jay, welcome to the show. And where is a good place to start to understand how you got to be in the business broker role? I know that you're a serial entrepreneur. You started off in the cheese business with your family, if I remember right. So that might be a good point to start.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Austin. I appreciate it. And yeah, it was a winding path to get here. As you said, serial entrepreneur. At first it was a W-2 job, even though it was with my family. So it was very much a mixture, right? I was getting a paycheck, but it wasn't your traditional, 9 to 5 job. It was like, hey, we need you extra, you stay. You don't have a choice. You just do. So I was kind of brought up on that, you work till the work's done, which is truly an entrepreneurial mindset. There's nobody over your shoulder coming in on the next shift to take it over for you, to make that call you don't want to make, whatever it is. So from a young age, I really understood the entrepreneurial mindset. I had hoped to take that over one day, tried to have some conversations about planning for the future, to which, family that was in ownership said, we don't really want to have that conversation. We'll deal with it when the day comes. And that was my first look at how not planning can be a problem. Just I didn't mind making what I felt was below market value if there was a plan for me to go forward. But without having that plan, I was aware I was saving money. In the meantime, I bought a home that was a 2 unit, so I lived in one and rented the other, which really made not making as much as I should have all right, because I had a rental income. And that kind of turned me on to real estate, which now I have 13 units. I should probably have more since that was 24 years ago. But, I focused on some other things. And as I said, when the family really didn't want to put together a plan for future, I took the money I had saved and was looking at some more real estate. And in the course of doing that, came across an Italian ice, basically an ice cream stand business that was for sale. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to get into the food space, which I'm already in. So I have some background. And I thought there would be a quicker return on my investment than buying real estate, which is much more passive. So that's where I really took the leap. And I was doing both family and the ice cream business. and saw that like kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out was really not doing me any justice with the ice cream business. So I took the leap and went into that and really got quite an education, on it was a franchise. So I learned about the franchise model. There was pluses and some minuses I saw because of my family business background. But altogether, it was a great experience, and I'd probably still be in it if some other things in life hadn't happened. But they were all positives. So at the end of the day, I looked at that business and built it as I was growing so that I could make an exit, because I saw how the family business just left them in a bad position. They didn't want to deal with me. They really had no outside opportunities to sell it to, because it was so niche. It was so intensive as far as like just handed down knowledge. There was no SOPs. There was no recipes for that you could transfer to somebody. So transfer of knowledge was dependent on that particular ownership group. So when I had the ice cream stand, granted it was a franchise, but I also tried to position myself so I could make an exit, and I did very well with that as far as the growth from where I bought to where I sold. In the meantime, while I was there, I bought the property that it was in, which I still hold to this day. So I set myself up, to make an exit and not be, looking over the edge of the cliff, to kind of have opportunities, and decide where I wanted to go from there. And that led me to, again, back to the real estate, where I said, hey, more real estate, more passive income allows for some time freedom and to make choices, where I can pursue things that I'm really interested in. So I got a real estate license. Yeah, it took me a few months after I was done, and I enjoyed the downtime after operating that store for 11 years. And then when I started networking, I met some business brokers, and they're the guys that I now work for. And it just seemed like a fit for me, with the family background, not planning, and how that ended, that they ended up closing. COVID was what really finished them off, but their age at the time, 68 and 78, the two owners, it just made that exit, that was just, they took a break and said, well, what are we doing here? And that's kind of a theme when you look at business owners who don't plan. They say we'll deal with it when the time comes. And that's the conversation I always have now is nobody plans for, a health event, the death in the family, anything like that. And even COVID is a good example where that was something nobody saw coming, but those types of events, those triggering events, can force you into immediate action. And if you didn't have a plan prior to that, well, now you're starting from ground zero. It's kind of like starting a business, as we talked about last time we spoke. You don't go into business without a plan, or at least some idea of what you're going to do. So you shouldn't expect to get out of it, without a plan. If you have a plan of a course of action ready to go and an event happens, you can start putting those things into motion. And that's largely why I got into this, was to try and help other people, be able to pass their business along, whether that is to a family member or selling it to someone else, an employee, someone outside the business, right? It's your legacy. When you put that much time and effort into something, it's like raising a child. You want to give that child all the information that you can, and all the guidance you can, so that when they turn 18 and enter the world, you feel confident they're going to do well. And a business is very similar. You put a lot of time and effort into that as an owner, and you'd like to drive by it 5 years after you sell it and say, hey, I started that business, and be proud of it, not look at a shell of a business, or, a building that used to house your business, and you're not able to see anything of it. It's just a rundown nothing at that point.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to help people realize, and help them avoid the negative outcome so they can have a positive outcome. And really, a lot of owners, their retirement is tied up in that business.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they don't own the property, well, then they really need the business sale. My family was fortunate that they owned the property and it had value. So when they closed the business, they still had a significant amount of value tied up in the property, which they eventually cashed in on. But their retirement was wrapped up in that business and in that land, right? So one or the other had to go for them to really feel comfortable in retirement. And I
Yeah.
think that's pretty normal for a lot of business owners.
Yeah, lack of planning, like you said, it tends to happen when you are in the exit planning phase instead of to the left of the exit planning phase. I see that a lot in the line of work that I do, really setting up some plans to help with exit plannings, to help with their valuation. There's some work that I do with my consulting business to help that out. And I see that time and time again. It's really not a thought until you're in the exit planning phase instead of doing some type of proactive work. But how you ended up as a business broker makes a lot of sense. When you examine your past, when you examine your story, you develop some early scar tissue from being in that family business and going through that pain. So it makes a lot of sense that you ended up in a position that helps other people not experience that scar tissue. So it makes a lot of sense. Let's go a little bit on a tangent into the real estate world. I want to pick your brain a little bit on in those waters, because I interface with a lot of real estate people as well. That's my personal background and how I started my consulting business, because I started in the real estate lane, just doing traditional financing or traditional finance, maxing out government accounts. And then I was using a high yield savings account to save for my rental down payments. So then I got into the whole life world and I started to scale my real estate portfolio. And that's how I got to the consulting business. So tell me a little bit more about the properties and the real estate ventures that you went into. You mentioned you accumulated up to 13 properties. So tell me a little bit more about your entry point into that and some major lessons that you learned in the real estate world.
Well, one thing that people don't realize is if you own real estate, rental real estate, right? You're essentially owning a business. It is the same as owning a business. I in fact met with a guy yesterday who had 40 properties at one point, got rid of them all, and now he's a government employee, works for the Department of Defense, but he's looking to get into business. And he said, well, I don't know a lot about it. I said, you sure do. I mean, when you look at real estate, your tenant is a lot like an employee and a customer, right? Because they're a customer in that they pay you, so they're a paying customer. They're also an employee in the way that you want to vet them properly, because you're going to have to work with them, to some degree. If you don't vet properly, you can end up with a real mess. Somebody that's not paying you, then you're working on evictions, and then it depends where you're at, how easy or hard it is to go through that. How much money may you lose in that process? What may they do to your property, leaving you with renovations, and you're going to have to foot the bill yourself. So, I always felt that real estate was a good teacher. If you do wrong, if you don't take all those necessary steps and precautions, you're going to pay for it. And you can recover from it. It's like anything. It's not comfortable, but that's where you learn, right? Where in those uncomfortable moments is where you say, well, I probably did wrong this time, and this is how I'm going to fix it going forward. So to me, that's, I see both sides. People come out of real estate scarred by, some bad experience and want to get into a business. And I see the other side, like me, I was like, hey, if I can get more into real estate and further away from the business daily operations of a business itself, I enjoy that. It has its challenges like anything else. One of the challenges was I self manage a few of the properties that are in a small cluster. To me, that's not too bad. I have all the connections there in that area to make, if a tenant calls me, I know the contractor I need to reach out to go take care of it. If you have that, then you can kind of self manage, right? But I have a larger property that is in an area that I vetted the area, but I don't know the contractors and whatnot. So I have property management, and I've learned a lot through that, what I like and don't like about it. There's it they charge me a fee, a monthly fee, a percentage, 10% of the rent roll, but I don't have to answer the phone every time. I don't have to call the contractors. Now, with that being said, they're spending my money, not theirs. So when something needs to be fixed, they jump at it quickly sometimes. And from my point of view, probably overdo it at times. But they're just trying to make sure that the tenants are happy and, taken care of and not in a bad situation, which you kind of go through that and you learn. So it's kind of a similar lesson to business, right? You look at that management company and you say, without them, I can only grow so big because I can't do everything. I can't be everywhere. Fine, I have that little cluster of places, but how much can I grow right there, right? I need to expand if I want to grow. So management was a necessity. Business is the same. When you look at a business as an owner, when you start, a lot of times you're going to do everything. You're going to wear every hat because you just don't start up and have the finances to hire every position you need. But if you're smart about it, you're writing down what you envision this company looking like and what the roles are going to be, and you make like almost like a chart, like a tree of all those responsibilities, and you're putting your name in every seat at that point. Now, as you grow and the business starts to get more revenue, now you can start filling roles, and that allows you to grow because there's only so many man hours in a day. So once you max out, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't work 24 hours a day. Maybe at best 18 if you have zero other life and you sleep 6 hours, right?
Yeah.
And that's not even reasonable. So, you want to grow to where you have a staff and now you're multiplying man hours by how many people you have, which really gives you the opportunity to start making some life-changing money eventually, right? So I mean, that's kind of where I see a lot of similarities, in real estate and in business. You just have to create systems that allow you to grow, and you have to be willing to delegate responsibilities, but you also have to vet those people that you're putting in those positions well, and you have to be willing to correct them when they're wrong, right? You can't just hire your brother, your cousin, your friend, and never have the hard conversations. Because if you don't, you'll go 5 years down the road and things will be spiraling out of control. And then the conversations get harder and relationships fall apart because you let them do whatever they wanted and now you expect something different. But if you set that expectation from the start, it either is going to work out or they're going to say this isn't for me, or you say this isn't for me, and you're going to move on and find someone that fits and probably save your relationship.
Yeah, leverage is a key word there, not in the financial aspect, although it is important, apply leverage to expand your business and everything, but also leverage in the form of resources, employees. You have to leverage time because we only have a certain amount of time. like you said. I wanted to pick your brain on this too, so you transition from the real estate world to the business broker side of the world. When you're in the business of being a broker and everything, and you're selling these businesses, what's your opinion on owning a business as like an investment vehicle? So, a common trend that you see people follow is, let's say you get to 10 single family homes and then you upgrade to multifamily, then commercial, and then you buy a Walgreens, or then you buy some other type of like franchise of like a one-stop nutrition, and you can really, that's it's a great investment vehicle if you set it up right and everything. So what's your opinion? You are in this business of selling different businesses. Do you see people progress in a route similar to that? What have you seen, and what's your opinion?
Well, I think owning a business, is can can be more active than real estate in the sense that it's a more active cash flow, right? You're going to have to tend to employees, daily operations. Whereas real estate, there's ups and downs. There's a repair call here, a repair call there, but for the most part, you're operating, the end of a month, beginning of a month, where you're on your collections or paying bills, whatever the case is. But in a business, it's a bit more active because it's
Yeah.
a daily thing, and it can be 5 days a week, it can be 7 days a week. But I think a business, you're going to generate more revenue most times with one individual business than you know properties. Now that depends on the size of the scale of your property ownership. But what I see is, people that are into businesses then start buying real estate with the cash flow they have, like kind of protect
Okay.
that cash, right? It's a great place to park your money instead of
Yeah.
a bank account that's, high interest is like what, 2.5 to 4% these days, if you're lucky. Um, where they can find better returns in real estate and they can say, hey, every year I buy a property. It's, a good tax, excuse me, tax write-off for them, and it kind of is always going to be there. Real estate's over the course of time proved to be a great vehicle to hold your wealth and to increase it. And, if that's 20, 30 years down the road when you retire, hey, you either have those where they're cash flowing, and you really have very little debt left, or you can just sell them and then cash out and do what you want with your retirement time. The other side is I see people that own real estate that, you know, the opportunity presents itself where they're looking at it and they say, oh, well, this business is attached to this a piece of real estate I really like. And they feel like they have the wherewithal and the knowledge to run it and buy it, and they'll do that. The one thing I'd caution, and I usually do caution people, is make sure you know how involved the current owner is and how involved you're going to have to be, because whatever he's involved, you're probably going to have to be a little more involved at first just to learn and to understand it. If this guy's been doing it 30 years and he's absentee, that's a good sign that you can be absentee, but you might have to spend a little more time up front to, develop those relationships with the staff that he did develop over the years, so that, hey, I can count on these people. They're going to be good to me. I'm going to be good to them. But I think they go hand in hand. They're both good investments, and the right business is always a good investment. You just have to make sure that you vet it properly. And when I go through due diligence with a buyer, we're answering, if I'm representing the seller, I'm giving them all the information I can from the seller, from financial, legal perspective, having all the conversations, setting up the meetings, being an intermediary in those meetings, so that they can get all the information they need to make a good decision for themselves and their families. And the opposite is true. If I represent a buyer, I'm going to tell them, hey, these are the documents we need to get you to look over. And these are the questions we need to ask as follow up once we see those documents. There's plenty of people out there that will try to sell you their business and tell you that, like, oh, it's fantastic. And really the question is, well, then why do you want out? You need to look at the owner and say, is there a life event happening? Or, like, is it retirement age? Did someone in the family move away and they want to move to be like a son or daughter, and they're having grandkids and they live in Florida and you live in Pennsylvania? So yeah, I'm not quite retirement, but I want to sell this and move down there and be closer to my grandkids. Things that make sense. If it just seems like they're middle aged, like I went through it when I sold. I was what 44, and people were saying, "Why are you selling this? It's doing so well." My explanation was, I have a girlfriend that lives an hour and a half away, and she has 2 kids, and we're gonna see if this is gonna work. And if it's gonna work, I got to be the one that makes this move. It can't be her. So that kind of made people say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But for me to say I'm exiting and I'm going to stay in this town, nothing's changing, would be like a red flag to
Yeah,
me as a broker. I'd say, well, we need to dig deeper. What's the real, if you're making that much money and you're happy with everything, why are you getting out?
sure.
What are you hiding? How much time are you putting in? How frustrating are the employees?
Mhm.
Just things that as a buyer, you want to know what you're getting into.
Yeah, that makes sense. The red flags that would definitely spark further investigation, if you will. I know you went as a agent as well on the real estate side, and you transitioned to the broker side. Do you see that happen a lot with different realtors? Like, what was your motivation to transition, and why did being a broker stick instead of being a realtor?
Well, I just felt like there's realtors are a dime a dozen, kind of, right? And everybody sees it as like, oh, that sounds like a great job. Sell a couple houses, have a lot more free time. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I felt that way looking at it from the outside. And when it came down to it, for me, it was just a matter of my background, the business experience I have. I felt wasted if I went into strictly real estate. Like I like the stories I told about the family business and my own exiting of my own business. I feel is a huge benefit to me when I'm speaking with business owners, saying, I know what you're going through. I've been there. I know all the emotions that are attached to I want to sell. And then when you do sell, you're excited. But then afterwards, sometimes you feel like, boy, what did I do? I'm out here kind of lost now in a way. Um, I just felt like all that experience needed to be conveyed to someone, and I was better suited to do that than to just sell real estate.
Okay.
Now, at the same time, I'm working on a couple real estate projects now. Uh, and it's funny because I look at it like I have less experience in that now, I feel like, than I do in the business brokerage side as far as completing deals. But they kind of, again, go hand in hand. They're very similar. And what I see from real estate agents is they don't necessarily get into business brokerage altogether. It's over time. And I was just at a networking event with probably 30 real estate agents last week, and a lot of them are selling some businesses because they got the opportunity to sell the real estate, and the business just happens to be owned by the same guy that owns the real estate. And they said, well, sure, we'll sell this with it. Um, Sometimes they do a great job valuing it because they bring in an accounting firm, certified valuation analyst, and get a good value of the business separately from the property, because the property, you're doing comps. The business, you have to really do a valuation based on cash flow. Uh, some of them do that, and they have more success. Some of them go the opposite way and just say, well, I'll just estimate what it's worth or ask the business owner what he wants to sell for. And, most times those don't sell quickly because business owners want more than the value that it's actually worth. Um, so you see some failures there. You see stuff that sits on the market a long time. That's one thing we don't want to do is we want, if I'm going to take you on as a business client, I want to be confident I can sell you. I want to make sure that what I'm representing is a good business, that when I talk to buyers, I can say, hey, I vetted this. I wouldn't even be selling it if I didn't think this was a good business to sell. Um, so it's kind of mixed, right? The two worlds mix. And in both worlds, we're opportunists, right? We're looking for an opportunity to sell. That's how we make money, is based on success. um and it depends who you're dealing with. If you're a business owner or a property owner, vet the agents or brokers you work with. Talk to several, try and get an idea of what their values are, because at the end of the day we get paid on commission. But like I said, I've probably turned down 10 times more deals than what I've taken to the finish line, because I just don't believe in it. I don't want to represent something. I don't want to try and sell something just to make money. I want to sell it because I want to do right by the owner and I want to do right by the buyer.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that drew me to you when we had our first conversation, really leading with values. You know my story of what I do with my consulting business. Everything ties into my estate plan to support the jiu-jitsu community and to support the disabled community. And a large reason why I started my whole consulting business is I found it very frustrating to find trusted people in the right locations. I firmly believe this. I think you should be able to go online, type in business broker or real estate agents or consulting, maybe CPA, and you should be able to get a certain product. But that's just simply not the reality that we live in currently. There are predators in the space. I'm not saying that they're all bad eggs out there, but it is extremely difficult, way more difficult than I thought it was going to be, to find trusted people in the right locations. So that is one of the major reasons why I launched this whole podcast and launched everything that I do with this consulting business. So tell me a little bit more about what sets you apart with your business broker business other than most folks. I know we talked a little bit about how you set up consulting fees and everything, which I found very interesting and really cool. And I want you to speak on that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, everything with us, we usually start with a conversation with an owner. A lot of referrals are coming through what I would call people on the inner circle of that business owner, right? Like they're, you know, people that give them advice, like they're CPAs or accountants, financial planners, attorneys, because we want an introduction where we're trusted. Now, granted, I still go out and make some connections on my own. Um, but we all start with saying, tell me about your business and what are your goals, and try to see where that owner's at, because so many people, there's so much information out there online, or whether it's, someone they know told them what they think their business is worth, but we want to get down to what the facts are. So we usually start by saying, let's do some sort of valuation, whether that's just a broker's opinion of value, or a calculation of value, which is going to cost a little more, or a conclusion of value, which those are rarely used. Those are highly scrutinized, able to stand up to a high level of scrutiny, I should say, um, that most people don't need. A calculation of value is something you would use if you had a partner buying out another one or two partners, however that may be, because you need a firm number to stand on. But to do a broker opinion of value, we can do fairly easily, which could be as easy as, most times I'm going to say, give me your last 3 years tax returns. And here we are in mid-July. I'd say, well, give me the first 6 months, the first 2 quarters P&Ls for 2026. And I'll go through, we have a little program I can type it into and enter all the information and then ask for some like I can look at most tax returns or P&Ls and see what an add back would be, like an adjustment made to the cash flow. And when I say that, I mean every owner of a business spends money personally out of the business, prior to taxes, right? It's a benefit of owning a business. You might purchase your car through the business or lease your car through the business, but you don't use your car to deliver products for the business. You're just driving to and from work, which is not, unfortunately, not a write-off, right? But so in that case, we would say, well, we're going to add back those payments you're making on your car. You might pay for health insurance pre-tax dollars. Well, a new owner doesn't have to pay for that. So we'll add that back to the cash flow. And we come up with an adjusted cash flow, which is more of a true reflection of a cash flow a new business owner could expect this business to throw off if they do everything the same as what you're doing, making no improvements or doing nothing to, take away from what you're doing. And that's how we kind of look at it. We do the last 3 years and look at an average, a weighted average. So the most recent year being holding the most weight. And from that number, we use some multiple. And those multiples are usually between 2 to 4 times that adjusted cash flow number. Some industries will be higher, but most aren't lower than that. The majority of industries fall in that range. So we use our references to find what fits that particular industry and then come up with a number. And that's where our conversation starts with the business owner is like, hey, this is what the numbers are saying you're worth. And most times that does not fall where most people thought their value fell. So that's how we start the consulting conversation. We try to give them some tips as here's things you can do to fix this. If they want more help from there, then I can offer consulting. I can say, hey, for a set fee every month, depending on the hours we're going to need to spend, we can put together a plan and basically give you a plan and then have check-ins to say, how are we doing? Where are we at on these? Have you hit these marks? And then try to position them to get maximum value at sale time. Now, sometimes, like I reviewed one a couple weeks ago, and they just didn't even have the money to do that. I could see that by what I was looking at. Now, you could make a case that if they spent the money, they would make more money, and then it would cover what they were paying me. But that's a big step for a lot of owners to take. So, what I'll do is I'll find community organizations in the area where I'm at, and I have some good connections there, and they offer some business funding for people to capital injections to kind of help the business progress. But they also offer free consultation, free consulting work to help them grow. Things that I can't necessarily do, but that's also a plus if I have someone like that to hand it off to. Like, we just don't want to say, hey, you're unsellable, or you're below what I'm going to work with, and then just leave them. We always want to kind of give them options to say, you can get your way out of this. You can put yourself in a better position, and here are some people that may be able to help.
Okay. Do you find that's the norm with most business brokers? Like, it seems one of the large main priorities of business broker is to, fact find, analyze the business, do their valuation, and then move forward from there. So do most business brokers work on the consultant side too, where they have different partners to help solve some of these problems that come up? Or is it strictly most business brokers are just in that first lane? What have you seen?
Well, I can't really say too much because I've only worked at the firm I'm currently at.
Okay.
I through my conversations with mostly buyers, Um, what I gather from them is response times vary, when they contact a broker. The process is fairly similar, but the release of information is different based upon who they're dealing with. Uh, some people will say, well, they'll kind of push you into a letter of intent, and then say, then we'll give you more information. And yeah, we have to be kind of careful with how much information we hand out. But at the same time, if somebody signs a non-disclosure agreement and one more piece of information is going to help them make a better decision, I'm usually willing to do it as long as it's not pushing too far, because I want to get someone under a letter of intent that I'm confident is going to get to the finish line, not somebody that I'm just getting to sign this thing so I could say, hey, we got you a letter, and then a month later they back out of a deal. So I just see everything from my point of view, it's all about, honesty and integrity, right? So that we don't have issues down the road. Now, what other people do, I can't really speak to that. And I've never been one to really concern myself with what other people are doing. I just want to do what I feel is right for me and for my clients. And my hope is always that will continue to lead to more business, because people like honesty and integrity, right? Like you said before, you can search all day and find a million, clicks, but it doesn't matter. And you don't know just by looking at that, those search results,
Yeah.
what you're getting. So
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned working through that scar tissue early on with your family business as you were going through the exit planning phase and everything. What are the most common mistakes that you see people make, or, rather the work they don't do before that hurts them come evaluation time? What are those major things? Like when I interface with small business owners, there's really two main aspects that I would say the most on in this area. One is tax planning. So they're trying to do an exit planning and their tax situation is just jacked up, really just jacked up. One of the major areas I work with when in that realm is cash balance plans. So it helps solve a lot of those major tax problems that business owners may have on the way out. Makes their evaluation much better because their tax problem is sorted. You could get a dollar for dollar deduction using a whole life chassis with inside of that cash balance plan vehicle. So that's one lane. Another one is key person insurance. So this is really prevalent with small business owners. You may have one or two key employees to where if they leave, the business is like in serious trouble. So we could design key person insurance using that same whole life chassis to help protect the business. So if something were to happen to that key employee, well, then the business is protected. Then you get all the same whole life benefits in there too. You get a guaranteed return. You get the tax-free vehicle, and then you get the line of credit too against the equity, so you could go expand your business. So those I would say are the two main areas that I operate in to help solve some problems in the evaluation or exit planning phase with small businesses. But what are the major issues that you see come evaluation time that really helps business or that hurts business owners, and what can they do to fix it?
well, those are good ones, but the two that I think are the biggest, what I see is, and owners that take pride in saying, I do everything around here.
Mm.
I don't know how this business would survive without me. Well, that's usually not a good start to a positive sale, right? And to you getting all your maximum value out of it.
Yeah.
Um, it's great that you know the business inside out. That's fantastic. But I always like to say, what happens if you go on a 2-week vacation or longer? What kind of state is the business going to be in? And if they can walk away for that time, then that's a good start. That's one big one. And do you have systems in place for when something goes wrong? Are you the guy that has to be called, or is there a chain of command that, hey, this goes wrong, they call this person, like you're the last one on the list that gets called if it gets escalated that far? So going hand in hand with that is SOP, standard operating procedures. Just having things like that in place, even having KPIs, so what goals you're shooting for all the time. If those things are in place, that's a lot easier. If I bring a new owner in, a buyer comes in and buys this business, and he's got to replace the owner, but in a way where there's 5 other people getting a phone call before him, before it's escalated to him, it puts him in a good position. And if there's SOPs and KPIs, and he can take over. And then not only that, the seller has a smaller transition time, because he just needs to integrate that guy into the systems he has, the buyer. Whereas if there's no systems in place and the owner is heavily involved in every decision made, well, then his transition period, one, is going to be longer, because he has to teach the buyer everything he's done over the years. And if something happens to him, say it's a year transition and he has one of those life events, has a heart attack and dies, that buyer is really in a bad position, because now the only thing he can do is lean on the employees to say, hey, how did this go before? And you hope they're honest, and maybe they are honest, but they usually don't know everything the owner knew. Even though they think they know a lot about what they're doing, there's probably still some underlying things they didn't know. So those are really the two big points. The one thing I'd say is, like you were talking about tax planning, if you have these other things in place, I think it's very easy to put I'm not saying what you do is easy, but easy to put a plan together for the future of that. And, easy to say, hey, you know what? You've been without key person insurance. All right, let's get you set up with that. Those become easier things to do when everything else is in place. Because you can have key man insurance, but if you don't have all these other things in place, you're still going to have some issues.
Yeah, it's like the foundation, like the core business framework and everything. Like, what are your standard operating procedures? What are your KPIs? If you don't have that information, it really doesn't matter what the hell you do. That's you're gonna have a poor foundation. So, getting into how you solve that. So, does your company come in and help consult and make those plans, make those KPI plans, make that business plan, like refining and everything? That's the work that you do to help solve that problem?
Yeah, we're capable of that for sure.
Okay.
It all depends on what that owner wants to do. We offer that service. There's, several of us in our own office, and we all have different skill sets. We all have different backgrounds. So we can cover just about anything depending on what the need is. One of my team members is a sales guy. That's his background. Another one was an investment banker. He's really a consultant anymore, but he's got experience in the banking world. We have 2 other guys one guy specifically that was in corporate finance. So he has the ability to work as a CFO. He does the valuations. He's a certified valuation analyst. We have another guy who has an MBA, and he was working he owned his own physical therapy business. And then after he exited that, he worked for a company that was a national company he was in the acquisition side, helping them acquire other physical therapy businesses. So our experience is wide ranging. And me personally being in, franchise and retail space, QSR, I kind of, the family business was more like manufacturing and a deli. And then the ice cream business was, made on site. The Italian ice was made on site, but that was a QSR, quick service restaurant. So ready to eat stuff. So you were firing away, 2-hour segments, post meals. So we've kind of cover every base. And the ones we don't, if we get into a consulting gig, and they require more in the technological space, advancement in their technology. Well, we have partners that we'll bring in and say, hey, this is right in your wheelhouse. Make the introduction, and then show how working together, us and our partner, we can put together a full plan for that business.
Love it. Yeah, it's kind of like a one-stop shop, and maybe not everything under the one roof, but you could consult out and still get all those problem solves, under that same umbrella. I'm sorry, I got to wrap us up here on time. We're about to bust time, but last question I have for you is how can people get a hold of you for those listeners that are in the exit planning phase or perhaps know people going through that phase? How can we get a hold of you and your firm?
Well, you can find us, the firm, online at midatlanticbas.com. And, personally, you can email me. I believe my email is on the website, but my email is my first initial, J period Calandra, my last name, Calandra, at midatlanticbas.com. And you can reach me by phone at 610-442-2606. I'm always open to inquiries, people that are, starting out. As I said, I met a guy yesterday who was thinking about buying, and, we had an hour-long discussion about what that looks like, the things he can do to get started, how we may be able to work together, how we can help him. So, I would say a large part of what I do is just conversations, guidance, and providing information to people, and trying to educate, so that we have a bunch of smart buyers and sellers out there.
Sweet, dude. I'll make sure to get all of your links and everything and put those in description. But just want to thank you for your time again. I appreciate you. This was another fun one, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, Austin. I appreciate it.